Time to talk some shit. You listening to the Power Movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and this week my guest is a pro skier who is doing the winter pro athlete thing different than anyone before him. I'm talking about Greg Hill, a dude who became known globally for his adventures walking up mountains. This guy is batshit crazy. He's done things that most people would never even think to attempt. That include 1 million vertical feet in a ski season, 50,000 vertical feet in a day, and his big season, 2 million vertical feet in a year. Some really crazy shit that earns him the title the human lung. But if things go right, Greg won't be remembered for that 2 million vertical feet that included airplanes, helicopters, and snowmobiles. Because Greg's life and times have totally changed with the times, and he is an early adopter of electric vehicles in the world of snow. Greg went from having one of the largest carbon footprints in action sports to having one of the smallest, and we are going to talk about it all on the podcast. Before we get into it, I want to ask you to follow me on Instagram at The Powell Movement, tell a friend or two about the show, and review me on whatever platform you listen to me on. I also want to thank my amazing sponsors for making this show happen. They are Evo, Stanley, Spy, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and the Summit at Snoqualmie. This is Cyber Monday or Cyber Week or whatever you call it. All my sponsors have great deals, so please check out their sites and support them. But enough about them. Now, let's talk to Greg Hill.
We're not going to do video. I don't get to see your expressions as we chat or what you're wearing.
Well, I don't wear much when we podcast. That's the only way I kind of get into my groove. I know it's kind of weird, and I usually don't share that with people.
That's great because I'm pretty much on the couch doing the same, so at least we're on the same starting point.
One Canadian, one American, same wavelength. I like it. So where'd you just fly in from?
I was in Utah for a conference with Arc'teryx and then had some talks in Vancouver and finally made it home today.
How was the food at the airport?
The food at the airport? I didn't eat any in the airport.
Did you have anything on the flight?
No, I try not to do anything on the flights because I hate all the plastic that's associated with anything on airplanes.
Your life to do things is a catch-22. We're not going to talk about that in the beginning of the podcast, but what we are going to talk about is a little bit weird. I was looking at your LinkedIn. I don't know how much time you spend on there, but I noticed that you had backcountry.com listed as a sponsor.
Oh, wow.
Are they a sponsor of yours?
No, that was from 2010. That's how up to date I am on LinkedIn. I better get on there and change that.
Yeah, because it looks like they sponsor you. Have you heard what's going on with them lately?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
What is your take on Backcountry owning the Backcountry and then relinquishing the ownership of it?
Well, I'm glad they gave it back to us because I wasn't sure where I was going to ski this winter.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been a big deal. You'd have to rebrand everything you did or your old sponsor would sue you.
Yeah. Honestly, I didn't want to go too deep into that when I saw those articles because that sort of stuff frustrates me. And I mean, how can you steal the word backcountry from where it is? Backcountry itself is about exploring and personal adventures, and then to think that they could use it as their own brand, I didn't really get it. So sometimes those conversations I just have to look at and shrug my shoulders and hope that it settles itself out as it seems to be. At least now I do have the backcountry to ski in again, which is great.
Yeah. And it's funny how your perspective is one way, but in the boardroom, it can be looked at on paper as, oh shit, we can own this word and we're just going to have a monopoly on that market.
Yeah. I think it was one decision that they didn't really think through. And I hope that the slap that they got from it is going to echo and make sure they think further on their decisions in the future.
Yeah, I think they're going to throw a whole lot of money at anybody who ever had the word backcountry associated with them and try to create goodwill through that.
Hey, good point. I could approach them. Maybe it's time to get responsored by them.
Yeah, they need to change the perspective of everyone in outdoor sports, and they can do it with you. I personally just think they should push everybody to Evo, but that's because they sponsor my show, but that's totally different. We're going to get away from the world of corporate lawsuits and asking you about them. And we'll talk about something that's totally different. Small town Quebec. I think you grew up in a town called Sutton. And what is the best of Sutton for someone that doesn't know anything about it?
I haven't lived there in a long time, but I was pretty fortunate. I grew up in the middle of the backcountry. Our nearest neighbor was a kilometer away. We had hundreds of acres of forest and hill behind us. So it kind of just started me wandering out in the woods and having fun, which obviously echoed further on in my life. But I think most people recognize Sutton as having the best glade skiing in the East.
Okay. And is it an outdoors family? Are you guys going skiing at an early age and hiking and really taking advantage of all there is at Sutton?
I think one of the reasons I like skiing so much is that I definitely have all these memories of skipping school and going skiing with my mom or my dad. And I often think that whatever made you happy as a kid will make you happy as an adult. And it is. It's those memories of, oh, it's a 20-centimeter POW day, 8-inch POW day, and then let's skip school and go skiing. And I definitely was fortunate enough to ski a lot as a kid. And my mom's definitely a backcountry skier. Her and her husband are who I started backcountry skiing with in 95. And they now live in Revelstoke in the winter to backcountry ski. So it's definitely part of our upbringing and our genes, I guess.
Cool. And like a lot of 80s kids, divorce happens young in your family. Does that fuck you up at all, or is that just something that you have to deal with?
I think it fucked me up a little bit. I mean, it made me more of a mama's boy for a bit, but in the end, they're both happier with the partners they chose. So that was good. But yeah, for sure, it made me a little insecure as a kid, but you learn to grow and move past that. Got a great relationship with both my step parents. So I'm pretty fortunate.
With those melding of families, because I think there's two sides, it becomes a ton of kids in the household.
Oh, yeah. I mean, when people ask me about my family, it's really kind of a challenging one to explain. I mean, there's 4 original kids plus 2 stepkids on one side plus 2 stepkids on the other side, and then a half sister in the middle. When people ask me how many brothers and sisters, it's just a vague answer that I kind of mumble away at.
Do you get lost in the shuffle at all being a kid? Does it feel like there's too many kids?
Well, yeah, I think you're kind of trying to dig into the point that I've often wondered is that I was the youngest of the original 6. And obviously, as the youngest, you're like, God, nobody's noticing me. And how do I get attention? I think that that's probably what started stimulating me doing crazy things like climbing up trees and hanging off branches, is that I'd be noticed by my siblings and my parents. So I do think that being the youngest made me a bit more of an extrovert and a wild person just so that they'd notice me.
When you say that, it kind of reminds me of another story I found out about in your life where I think you're around 14 years old and you were 30 feet up in the air on a boat mast. And while life for you is all about risk, I don't know what it was back then. It sounds like you were a risky kid as well. Tell us that story. What happens?
You've done your research. I was bored and we'd been sailing around the Bahamas for a week or 10 days. And I was definitely getting bored. So the whole time I'd been looking up the mast and thinking, God, that's a nice 25 or 30-foot jump from up there. That'd be pretty fun. And we were finally at anchor and I was like, hey, I'd been talking to my dad about it, I guess. And I was like, okay, I think it's time to go do it. And he followed me up the mast and we kind of stood up on the spreaders, which are these metal bars that hold the wires away from the mast to keep it upright. And I definitely remember watching the waves and trying to synchronize my leap out with the tilting of the boat, because it seemed like it's something you need to do, is you need to time it so you don't hit the boat.
Yep.
I felt like I timed it properly. And I definitely remember jumping and pushing off. And when I pushed off, I went nowhere, because it turns out when you push off on a mast that's 30 feet up, it actually just moves away. So there I was, suspended in the air, looking down, going, oh my God, I'm going to hit the boat. So I grabbed back onto some wires, which as I fell, those wires joined into a V and went through that spreader I was talking about and somehow caught my finger. And I continued to fall, but somehow let go and grabbed back on and kind of guided myself down onto the boat, where I landed quite hard on my feet. I honestly thought I was okay. I stood up. I was like, oh God, I survived that. Awesome. And then I looked down at my finger and my left pinky finger got torn off and there was a bit of a bone sticking out and a bit of blood. And I definitely remember swearing quite loudly and kind of recognizing that shit had gone wrong, but that I was okay. I was a foot from an open hatch. Things could have gone a lot worse. It was an epic from there. It was getting to the hospital or the infirmary and then getting flown through a storm to Miami for surgery and all that. But I always reflect back on that as one of my first learnings, that when you're taking risks, you have to really kind of analyze the situation, recognize all the different factors involved before you go and take the leap. Because I just kind of thought a bit about it, took the leap, and ended up suffering some consequences.
Yeah, you go from being a dumb kid having fun to being a dumb kid with 9 fingers, and I think that probably makes you more calculated from there on out.
Yeah, it definitely weighed into me for a bit. I remember, I don't know about the dumb kid thing. I'm going to get back at you for that. But I definitely remember later on in grade 8, having some girls calling me a freak because I didn't have a finger and all sorts of things like that kind of helped me grow up as an individual. But grade 8 was a challenging time for me.
Has it impacted you not having a finger other than like throwing shakas?
Shakas is a tough one. When I drive into drive-throughs and I ask for money, they give me the money back. It tends to bounce out of the cup because I can't cup that well.
Okay.
And then they feel all bad. And then I try to explain. Anyhow, it gets a little ugly. But yeah, overall, it's kind of the best handicap you could have, really. It's pretty insignificant.
Other sport-wise, do you do anything other than just adventuring?
Growing up, I was fortunate enough. I went to a private school and I was offered all sorts of sports. I mean, I loved soccer, rugby, cross-country running, anything I could really do. It was awesome. Rock climbing was definitely one of my bigger passions from 16 to 24.
Okay. And what kind of kid are you? If you were to buy tickets to see a show or go buy a tape at the store, what are you listening to and what group do you fit in high school?
Musically, I've always been an oddball. Music doesn't really stick to me. I mean, I enjoy music. I enjoy dancing, but there's no songs on my iPhone. I'm more of a daydream, but luckily I was decent at sports, so I kind of fit into the sports group, but I was also a hacky sacker. We definitely hacky sacked a lot.
So you're like a granola jock?
Yeah, I don't really know how I'd fit in. I mean, I did theater. I did well at school. I tried to be cool. Never was that cool, but wanted to be cool. Yeah, who knows?
When you graduate high school, you end up going to a college in the friendly city of Halifax, but that's like a 12-hour drive from home. And it seems like it's more about water than the mountains. What made you choose Dalhousie University?
Dalhousie University.
Dalhousie.
Yeah. I took the year off after high school and traveled to Australia, got really into rock climbing even more then. And, I was trying to follow the path that we're supposed to take. I was trying to be the good kid. My dad wanted me to be a doctor or something, a scientist. I'm not really sure what, physiotherapist. So I was really trying to fit the mold, although I knew it was going to be a tough one for me because I was definitely very energetic and driven by adventure more than scholastics at the time. But I chose Dalhousie because my friends were going there.
No big reason. Are you skiing a lot while you're there in school?
I spent more time rock climbing there than anything else, I think. I skied twice for a bunch of years there. I really didn't ski.
I think you went for like 2 years and decide to leave. So what makes you leave school? Because it's not the burning passion to go skiing every day. Is it rock climbing and, hey, I'm just going to do that?
I just knew that I was wasting my own time and money on something that I wasn't passionate about. It just seemed like a waste. I assumed that at some point I'd grow up and I'd probably want to go back. But right then, I just had a burning desire to see the world and try to figure out who the hell Greg Hill was.
What year is this?
We're talking 96, 97.
It's around this time that you take a trip with your mom in the backcountry with Rudy Beglinger.
Yeah.
And you're in the backcountry for a week. And while that dude is hardcore, I think he's done 1 million vertical feet in a year. He's not as hardcore as you, but you don't know that yet. Does that trip inspire you to be a super athlete skier, being around that dude?
It was definitely a really neat week. I was blown away by what we were doing. It was totally mind-opening. The skiing was incredible. And I know I've got a journal from those days, and I remember reflecting on how, like, watching him travel through the mountains, his confidence, his skills, I remember just being blown away by it. And I couldn't quite understand how he was so comfortable moving us around this treacherous terrain. And I was definitely inspired by what he was doing, but I had no concept that I would ever learn or get into it at the time.
Are you like a super athlete at this point? Because when we talk about all the things you've done in your career, I mean, you've become the human lung. You're the dude that can go further and longer than anybody else. But did you always have that mentality with sport and everything else you were doing growing up? Or is that something that you eventually learned to love?
Yeah, I mean, I did a lot of running in school and soccer and rugby and that stuff. Climbing was definitely my forte at the time. I was definitely quite a good rock climber for that period of time. I was one of the best in Halifax. I did some competitions where I did really well. But my focus then was definitely rock climbing. I lived and breathed it. I probably climbed 6 days a week.
Dang. Is it through rock climbing friends that you start transitioning into backcountry skiing? Or is it that trip that you went on with your mom? What really makes the shift in your world?
Well, it's a kind of an interesting one. Yeah, so I traveled all around the States, climbing in a van after university with a friend, kayaking and climbing. And then I moved out to Canmore in 98, 99 because I thought, okay, this climbing's cool. I want to climb mountains. I'm going to go out and climb ice. So I moved out to learn to ice climb. And I was definitely really strong then compared to now. I actually could do chin-ups and stuff, but I just wanted to ice climb. So I worked at Sunshine Village, the ski resort. because one of my brothers worked there. And then while I was working there, I was climbing every weekend, ice climbing, and it was awesome. I climbed some really wild shit. Because I was such a strong rock climber, I kind of transitioned quite easily to it. It was really neat, but it didn't catch me as much as I thought it would. It was kind of always, you're climbing up the ass crack of a mountain. It was really cold. You were usually at the top shivering, just happy that you're alive. But then I was rock climbing a bunch. But truly the transition happened is that I moved to Whistler the next year because everybody said Whistler was better. And I was definitely getting back into skiing and finding some great rewards there. But one day climbing in Whistler, I went out. It was a 512C crux. It was like a 511 bottom. I didn't warm up. I was like, oh, I'll be fine. I don't know if you know grades, but I'll warm up in the 11. When I get to the 12C crux, it'll be fine. I'll just crush right through it. And I got up to the crux, did some crazy high foot move and stretched my arm out, and I dislocated my shoulder. Kind of just tore my shoulder right out of my body just from how hard the move was, and managed to get it back in, finish the climb. From then on, I all of a sudden had this nagging weakness. And if you know climbing's all about confidence in your body, confidence in your skills. But I kind of was losing confidence in my body because the shoulder wasn't staying in. And I'd gotten so used to challenge and reward that I was a bit of a loss. I was like, God, well, what am I going to do now? This has been my passion for 6 to 8 years.
Yeah.
And I love it, but I can't do it. So luckily the ski touring kind of took off then. I just took all the learnings I had from rock climbing and put it into skiing. So in a way, it was a disastrous moment in my rock climbing career. I've never been as good or able to do it as I could then, but it really got me into ski touring. So I'll have to say that it was a disaster that kind of worked out well for me. I probably would have killed myself rock climbing. I was really strong, but very naive. And I think it was probably a blessing in disguise to take me off the rock and put me into the mountains.
It's funny that it would be safer in the mountains, but I can totally see it. I was a young person living in the mountains in the late 90s, and I'm the opposite of you. I kept hiking to a minimum. I'm super lazy. I love gravity and not going up. So that's me. But we did go to places that were really dumb to go to back then, unless you had the right gear, which me and my friends didn't back in 98, 99. We were stupid and we're still here. But the way you approach things has never really been stupid. And I feel like in the early days of you heading out in the backcountry, you had the sense of mind to take an avalanche course, and everyone learned something in their first avalanche course. Tell us a little bit about what you learned.
I did. I took my first avalanche course in Rogers Pass because I kind of living in Kenmore, people talked about Rogers Pass. Living in Whistler, they talked about Rogers Pass. So I was like, okay, I'm going there. That's where I'm going to go learn. Because I'd been introduced to it through Rudy Beglinger, I understood that mentorship was key, that learning from people that were comfortable out there was going to really help me. And I knew I was a bit of a wingnut. And yeah, my first course was definitely an ill-fated course. 2 days before, I met up with my cousin and his friends here in town, and we partied with this guy Shane and this guy Frank. And then a couple of days later, I was out on the course, and we were digging snow pits, and we were talking about avalanche hazard, and just snowed 3 feet. It was the first bluebird day. Everything looked incredible. And there were some people high above us working their way up the slope. And while we were standing there digging, all of a sudden, the guide who was in charge, all of a sudden he screams out, avalanche. And we've been watching videos of avalanches. We're like, what? Is this for real? Or is he just kind of making sure we recognize that we're in avalanche terrain? And I look up, and all of a sudden there's that, exactly like we've been watching in all the videos, this big, huge wall of white snow just slamming down towards us, growing and speeding up. And I definitely remember instantly kicking into survival mode and running into the woods from there because we were just on the side of the avalanche path. And we ran into the woods and watched the whole thing thunder by, and it was quite a crazy moment. And then once it all stopped, it was like all of a sudden the guides took control, and it was about searching the debris from then on to see if there's anybody in it. And about an hour later, I got flown back up in a helicopter to help with the people that had been found up top. And there's 5 people caught in it, and it turned out I knew them from the party the day before. And Shane, whose birthday we just celebrated, he passed away. And then my buddy Frank got wrapped around a bunch of trees and broken a bunch of bones. So it was definitely a wild learning experience to really see the reality of making mistakes in the mountains.
Yeah, and you're a young dude at that point. And for most people, the deaths that you see at that age are usually in a hospital, not really from a heavy situation. Is that your first death of a peer in a situation where you're supposed to be having fun?
Absolutely. And I mean, I fortunately didn't see him. I helped more with the knee injury versus Shane, who had passed away. But yeah, it definitely drove home that the mountains are incredibly amazing, but incredibly dangerous.
Does that whole situation make you realize that you really don't know much and you seek out more knowledge for the rest of your life?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I remember right away I came back from that. And I was talking to my buddy Scott Newsom, who was a bit of a mentor at the time. And he was taking a guiding course coming up. Right away, I signed up for another guiding course. I wasn't taking it to become a guide. I was literally just taking it to learn. I just needed to know as much as possible to avoid those situations.
Now it is time for me to take a sponsor break, and my first sponsor is Evo. And they have supported me since day one, and I've shopped there since the day they opened their doors. They have all the great brands, the most knowledgeable and approachable staff, and they know what they're doing when it comes to boot fits, ski and snowboard tunes. They're really good at service. And when I don't feel like leaving the house, I get my stuff through evo.com. They have the same deals, but with free shipping on orders over $50, a no-hassle return policy, and a low price guarantee. And for listening to the show, I've got a new deal from Evo for you on all Evo branded products. They make some amazing stuff. I've been using their ski poles that are just as good as my $100 poles, but I paid a fraction of the price for them, and their offering is a whole lot more than just ski poles. When you head over to evo.com and check out, enter the code POWEL20, that's all one word and the number 20, no spaces, and you'll get 20% off of all Evo branded products. And when you do it, because Evo is made of good and inclusive people, they're going to give an additional 2% of all branded sales to local youth organizations. They're helping you have fun and making a difference in the community. Next up, it's Stanley. They are the brand that invented the keep things hot and cold category back in 1913, and they are located down the street from my house in Seattle. You remember Stanley from that green bottle that kept your grandpa's coffee hot all day long. They still do that, and so much more. When I think about Stanley, it's all about water bottles and pint glasses. The water bottle is a simple classic Stanley style that keeps my water cold for a couple more hours than whatever you put your water in. The pint glass keeps my beer ice cold way longer than I need it to, and the beveled edge makes me hydrate faster for some reason. It just feels good, and you're going to want to feel good too. To do that, head on over to stanley-pmi.com, go shopping, and you will get 30% off your entire order when you use the code TPM30. That's all one word, the number 30. When you check out, you'll get that 30% off. Everything you buy helps support the show, so please do that. Now we're going to jump back into the podcast. In terms of your ski career, at least the goal-crushing side of it, it really starts in 99 when you get an idea. Y2K is right around the corner. You come up with the idea that you could climb 2 million vertical feet. Is that the inspiration when Y2K and everything just hitting your brain at once and like, fuck, I can do that?
Yeah. The way that I was paying for being a ski bum at this point was tree planting. So every summer I'd go up northern BC and I'd plant trees. And tree planting is this incredible game where every day you start at zero and you aim for some ridiculous number, because the more trees you plant, the more money you make. You get paid 12 cents a tree, 15 cents a tree. So each day you learn this total work ethic where the harder you work, the more you make. And I learned so much through that job that I started taking into the mountains. But a lot of it was just this mental math. You'd play with numbers all day because you were trying to figure out how much money you were going to make that day. It was a great job. I'd make $300, $400, $500 a day, depending. But it was all this obsession with numbers. So once I started ski touring, like say that winter, I was hiking up and I did 5,500 feet that day. And that was my biggest day at the time. I was like, wow, 5,500 feet, cool. And then from the tree planting and playing with numbers, I did 55 times 365. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, wow, that's 2 million feet. And I started to look at the correlation between Y2K, this crazy passage of time. And I was like, oh, wow, imagine 2 million feet in the year Y2K. And the million feet stuff came because Rudy Beglinger, as a guide, had been guiding 1 million feet a year forever, or nearly 1 million feet is what his ad said. And I was like, oh, wow, if he could do that, maybe you could do it in a whole year. So the idea kind of started then, but I had no skills. I didn't have the fitness. I didn't have the ability, the mountain sense. There was a lot that I needed to eventually accomplish that goal.
I think my Judaism blinded me because I heard you made $500 a day planting trees.
For years, I'd make tons of money. I typically, by the end, I did it for 15 years, but by the end, I was averaging $430 a day every day. So you'd go from May till August and you'd make 30 grand.
That's an insane amount of money for planting trees.
I know.
And you're making a difference.
Trust me, I wasn't caring about making the difference. I was just trying to make a difference in my bank account. But that is where I learned my work ethic, and that's where I learned to push and push and push. And for years, I was the best. There was nobody that could challenge me, some that would get close, but I was just so driven to the second the the car stopped, I'd jump out and rage for 8 to 12 hours. And it was that exact temperament and work ethic that I took into the ski touring world.
So setting and crushing goals started with planting trees and then worked its way into the rest of your life?
Yeah, definitely. I've got a video of tree planting. When I show it at talks, people are like, what the hell is that? I'm like, yeah, that's what I did for 15 years. So in the end, I planted over 1 million trees and provided lots of money for my adventures.
That's incredible. Something I would have never thought of. I mean, I think you can like donate blood to get money, but not plant trees to get money, but you can.
Yeah.
And at this point in your life, you know, in the millennium, you're nowhere near the 2 million vertical feet guy yet, but you're becoming a known entity in the world of Randonee skiing. And back then, if you were big in the world of Randonee, maybe 150 people in the world know who you were.
Big deal.
Yeah. Today, we know what you're doing is ski touring, and it's cool for a lot of people. But back then, did you feel like a ski outcast?
I wasn't too worried about being known or anything. I mean, I was just moving to Revelstoke to start exploring my mountain potential and get into it. And it just turned out that through the tree planting and through my drive, is I'd end every day and my partners would be all tired and I'd be like, oh, always desiring more. And the ski touring races, I mean, that was just something fun that I was like, oh, maybe I should do that. And the best thing is that the first race was usually somewhere in early January, and Revelstoke, typically you start skiing November 1st. So I'd have about 50 days of ski touring in the bank already. So I had this incredible endurance, and I walked into that scene completely oblivious, but ended up doing pretty well at it in North America, at least, which was really fun.
When you show up at that Whistler one in 2002, the first one you're there, does no one know who you are? And then you go kick everyone's ass and they're like, holy shit, who is this guy?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I remember Andrew McLean was one of the bigger names, plus some other Nordic guys. I had a blast. So, yeah, I rocked up with a leather jacket, a sick mullet, like one of the best mullets you could possibly have. Business in the front, all party in the back. And I do. This guy, Tim Kelly, I chat to him every once in a while, and he just remembers me coming up to the desk and being like, so who are the good guys? I just wanted him to point out the guys that were good, so at least I knew who the competition was. And yeah, proceeded to win that race 3 years in a row, which was pretty funny.
And people start to get to know you through that. You pick up Revelstoke and Sunto as sponsors. I doubt they're big dollar sponsors by any means. Your money is in planting trees. You do the 24 hours of sunlight race, and I think that's the year you do 40,000 vertical. Is that when you decide the next season's the one that you're going to go for 1 million?
I did 20,000 feet 1 year. I did 30,000 feet the next. I did 40,000 feet in the backcountry near Revelstoke here, and I was definitely pushing it. And then the Moreau brothers, they organized that race down in Colorado. And yeah, I did 50,000 feet at that first race. Or we did. Jimmy Faust and I teamed up at about hour 18. All of a sudden, some guy just caught up to me out of nowhere. It was like, hey. And I was like, whoa, hey. And my goal was, I'd been dreaming of trying to get to 50 forever. So he and I just teamed up and chatted about life and everything for the next 6 hours and did 50,000 feet together. So I did 1 million. I think it's 2005, 2006 when I did 1 million. You know, it took me 7.5 months, you know, and I did 50,000 feet that year, but I was definitely 7.5 months. So I was still not on par for the 2 million feet. And honestly, I didn't talk to anybody about the 2 million feet. That was just a daydream in the back of my head. I've never been one to like to talk about things that I'm not going to accomplish or might not. So it was a daydream.
Okay.
So then after I did the 1 million in 7.5 months, I still wasn't doing big enough back-to-back days. So I think 2006, 2007, I tried to do 110,000 foot days.
Yep.
But the real challenge was just to start getting my daily speeds up so I could do back-to-back days. And I think I started that season with 3 back-to-back 10,000 foot days. Like I was a bit of a freak for sure. But that year was definitely just building the stamina and try to see if, you know, it was feasible. And I think I only did 80 days. I was at 990,000 feet, well within time. And I just stopped. I was like, okay, I'm not going to get my 110,000 foot days, but I did really well and I was super psyched on it for sure. It was a wicked year. And those days I was running a blog, which was a huge inspiration to sharing stories and getting people psyched on adventures and kind of leaving tracks so people could figure out how to get to places. And it was a build up. But then the next year, I remember I was kind of daydreaming about starting it, trying my 2 million feet, but I was a little scared.
The 1 year that you did the 10,000 foot days, you did 990,000 vert. I wonder why you don't do another day and make it an even million.
It wasn't the goal that year. I wasn't too concerned about it. The goal was the 10,000 foot days, and I could see that I wasn't going to do 100, so I just was like, oh, there you go.
And you were capturing footage. Like, this is one of those things that you're actually going to make a movie around, the 10,000 foot days.
Yeah, I think I was just capturing footage to make my dorky little skin flicks movies just to share with people. Yeah, history is funny. Revisionist history. We like to remember the history as we want it. But I did a bunch of adventures. I was filming a bunch, sharing my adventures on my blog or whatever. But I made a movie called The Unbearable Lightness of Skiing.
Yep.
And it was my first foray into an actual non-blog movie. And I put it into the Banff Film Festival and they accepted it, which was crazy. You know, it went on the world tour and it was really exciting because it was just kind of trying to show what I was doing to people and to friends that are like, hey, Greg, what are you up to? And that's how it started. It was like, hey, Greg, what are you up to? And I was like, well, this is what I'm up to, and kind of tried to explain the passions behind backcountry skiing. But yeah, that went onto the Banff circuit in 2009. I did a filmmaker's workshop. And that's where I finally decided to commit to my 2 million feet. As I was at this workshop and they're like, hey, do you have any good ideas? Maybe you could pitch them just to practice. And I pitched my 2 million foot idea to this filmmaker's workshop and then realized that I was like, okay, let's stop dreaming about this goal. Nothing's going to get accomplished until you actually try it. So let's give her a go.
And you know mentally that you are capable of doing it at this point, I would think. You know yourself.
I knew at this point that I was really good at peeling back the layers. And no matter how far I peeled back, there was always a smiling, psyched person inside ready to keep going. So I definitely, through the planting, through all those 10,000 foot challenges, I definitely knew that I was ready. I wasn't good at getting sponsors. You know, Arc'teryx was supporting me then. Dynafit was a sponsor then. You know, we came out with the Stoke ski, which is a signature ski. But I wasn't good at actually the financial part of any of it.
The business side?
The business side, yeah. So I was definitely skeptical about trying it because I was like, shit, I don't have any support. How am I going to not tree plant? You know, I'm going to need money. But I just said, fuck it. Let's give this a go and see how it goes.
To do so, it's a giant carbon footprint to get to and from where you need to be. Does that kind of stuff factor in your head at all back in 2010?
Absolutely. The challenge or the hypocrisy of being an outdoor athlete who loves nature and driving my F-350. At that point, I didn't have a snowmobile, but driving my F-350 all the time. I was doing a bit of heli skiing or heli guiding. It was all part of it. I knew deep down that it wasn't perfect, but I also knew that I had to do it.
This is what's driving you as a human, and it comes with a huge price tag. You're not good on the business end of things. How much does it end up costing from start to finish to do that 2 million?
I don't know exactly how much it cost me. I know that at the end I was $25,000 in debt. So that's definitely the number I remember. Just be like, oh shit, I just stretched every credit card I had. My wife, we had 2 kids, 4 and 3, and we traveled down to South America. And, you know, I did have some sponsorship, but like I say, I wasn't good at asking for it. So it probably wasn't that expensive of a year because most of it was human powered. But, you know, I definitely, like I say, I ended up $25,000 to $30,000 in debt at the end of it.
Yeah, I would think a trip that big on a dude living on a tree planter salary, it's a tough thing to do. And you're married with kids. How does your wife deal with you being gone? Because I'm sure you're gone probably over 100 days that year.
The poor woman, she just signed up for it. Like when I first brought her out from Toronto to Revelstoke, I was gone tree planting for 3 months that summer. I was gone for a 21-day traverse. You know, right off the bat, I wasn't pretending to be somebody I wasn't. So it was very obvious what she'd signed up for. So I was really diligent at being the best I could. So I was taking advantage of going out really early. Like there'd be many days where I'd go out and climb a mountain, do 7,000 feet and be back by 9:30 and cooking breakfast, or being a good dad husband during the day and then going out at 6 p.m. for a quick lap up our ski hill here just to get my 5,500 feet. As crazy as I am, I also recognize the sacrifices and I try to do the best I can.
And then when you go out for one of these huge days that you go out on, what are you bringing with you? I mean, do you have a 40-pound pack with more snacks than you can possibly imagine?
Well, that's what's pretty wild about that year is I carried a big camera everywhere for most adventures. So yeah, I had probably a 50-liter bag with this big Sony camera in it, depending on the day, a tripod or other things, and lots of food. Yeah, definitely, 7,000 to 8,000 calories a day.
Damn.
I remember a day in South America where I went out, summited a volcano or two, then I skied down to the resort and I had a 4,000 calorie lunch and then I went back out.
Insane.
Yeah. My fighting weight was 165 then. There wasn't much extra on me.
That is so crazy. And the really crazy thing is that what you did, the 2 million vertical feet, that's the equivalent of 7,200 flights of steps a day or 408 stories a day. It's totally batshit crazy. Everybody should watch some of the videos and see it. But when you finish this 2 million vertical feet, you look down at your watch, you see that you've hit it. and you didn't think you were going to be emotional, but there are some tears. And what are the thoughts in your head now that you can look back and see that day? I mean, where do those tears come from?
As optimistic as I am, I mean, any good challenge has a high degree of doubt. If it's something that is a challenge, that means there's a lot of uncertainty. And for sure, I mean, as easy as I am with stress, there was always that thought like, there's so much pressure I put on myself. I'm 6 months in. I can't hurt myself. I can't have an accident. Okay, I got to keep going. And constantly this unknown, this fear that I was going to fuck up after putting in all this energy. And I didn't think I was going to cry at the end. But that moment where, boom, I'd done it was such a release of all the little worries and anxieties of over going so deep and then not accomplishing it. And yeah, I mean, the release, the crying was incredible. It felt so good to not have all that pressure anymore.
I think I've pretty much made it clear that I would never even think of attempting anything like this, and I am not capable of it, but you definitely are, and you did this. When you finish and you get your last day on December 30th, you come down, do you take a few days off, or are you so crazy that then the next day you're like, I'm just going to go for a 10-mile run?
So yeah, I finished on December 30th, but we were in the middle of the backcountry in Rogers Pass, and I understand that although that watch was a super accurate watch, that there's probably some unknowns, who knows what. So the next day, just to make it so more people could celebrate with me and stuff, I climbed a 10,000 foot day at the ski hill. So, say my dad, who's not a backcountry skier, or anybody in the town that's not a backcountry skier, they could all kind of be there for my last day. So I ended up doing 10,000 feet on December 31st. And then I think I did a little presentation at the bottom.
January 1st, when you've got all this behind you then, do you rest at all? Or is it like you cannot sit still and you constantly have to be doing something?
I don't remember what I did right after it. I do remember maybe a week or so later looking up at slopes that were 400 feet tall and thinking, oh my God, you're so big. I don't know if I can get up you. The mindset that I'd been in was so powerful that it carried me to the top, but definitely, I needed some downtime afterwards. I am quite a relaxed person. I'm not just constantly driven. I read a lot of books. I chill out a lot. So I do believe that you need the yin to the yang. What I did do is I got shoulder surgery about a month afterwards, just to really take advantage of having done so much and just relax even a bit more.
Okay. Back then, because when you're making the switch over to Salomon, and when I think about Salomon, they were the top brand when it came to park urban. They had Mark Abma, Mike Douglas, and they were focused on what everyone thought was cool. But what everyone thought was cool was shifting, where ski touring became cool and getting out there, that became a big deal. And Salomon's whole brand completely changed a few years later. Did you see that coming, and was that refreshing for you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working with Inappropriate for a bit. Like I said, I had a signature ski with them. It was super exciting. But I think I was getting $5,000 a year from them.
Which is nothing.
I looked at all the ads I gave to them, the third-party ads, from all the magazine exposure and everything, and it was close to $500,000. And when I showed them the discrepancy between what I was getting and what I was giving, they didn't care. So I started looking elsewhere, and lucky my buddy Chris Rubens, who lives in town, he was like, oh, Solomon's looking at getting into the backcountry. You keen to come and help us develop gear and join us? And I was definitely jaded with what was happening, and the potential to take a big company like that and help them make gear that would go to a wider audience was really exciting.
But at that time, it seems like Dynafit is all that is cool in that world, and Salomon's gonna get into it for sure, but they haven't really invested like they're going to in a few years, so it's almost a risky thing, but I guess when it's $5,000 on the table, there's no risk at all.
Yeah, there wasn't much of a risk that way. And also, I remember getting into their backcountry booth that they had at the time, and it was like, oh my God, I just went back in time. These things are 2.3 kilos. They have no walk mode. How am I going to get through this? But we were right off the bat. They brought me on to work on gear, so I knew that we were going to be producing newer, better stuff soon.
It's time for me to take my last sponsor break, and the brand I want to talk about is Spy Optic. They're a brand that I'm so happy to have involved with the show because not only do they have an incredible collection of sunglasses, but it's time to think winter, and Spy has been supporting all things snow since they started 25 years ago. Now, they have rad signature collections, game-changing technologies, and all their goggles have the Happy Lens, which really sets Spy apart from everyone else. And that's a big reason why you should be wearing Spy. The biggest reason to me that you should wear them is that Spy's goggles look better than everyone else's. I always think the other brands will catch up and fit and finish, but they don't. Spies look better and you will look better wearing them. For listening to the podcast, I'm going to make it easier than ever for you to get a pair of Spy sunglasses or goggles. All you need to do is head over to spyoptic.com, do your shopping, and when you check out, you'll get 20% off when you enter the code POWEL20, that's all one word with the number 20, and you're done. You're supporting the show and you're going to look better than you ever have before. My next sponsor is the Summit at Snoqualmie. They should be the choice for all Seattle skiers and snowboarders as they are our local mountain. And here's why you should go there. There's no long road trips that waste a lot of your weekend getting to and from the mountain when you head to the summit. It's only 45 minutes away, and when you get there, you will never be turned around because the mountain has no parking for you. On top of that, the terrain is awesome. There are 4 mountains to choose from, tubing, and no big corporate pass programs that create huge lift lines. It's the smart choice for those that don't like wasting time. To find out more about getting a season pass or just a daily lift ticket, head on over to summitatsnoqualmie.com and they will have all that information for you. My final sponsor is the 10 Barrel Brewery out of Bend, Oregon. They brew my favorite Northwest beers, and their cocktails in a can pack a punch and feature the best craft spirits. But what really separates 10 Barrel from its competition is that they live and breathe action sports. This is no bullshit. While a lot of brands want you to believe that they support snow because it's perceived as cool, 10 Barrel lives and breathes this, and they put their money where their mouth is. This year, they produced a snowboard movie, Hold My Beer. They produced a ski movie, Watch This. They'll have a series of hella big air events, and they'll donate a percentage of sales of their seasonal Pray for Snow beer to protect our winters. They really do drink beer outside, and you can find out more about their drinking outside adventures over at 10barrel.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. Back to Getting in the Mountains 2012. You're planning another big adventure, and I think you plan on climbing Cho-Yu, but Tibet is closed to climbers, so you settle on Manaslu, and this trip doesn't look good from the get-go. There are way too many people in base camp from what you see, and do you have a bad feeling right away?
Yeah, I remember Hoji was part of the first trip. We went up a 7,000 meter mountain before, a 6,500 meter mountain before, and we had a blast skiing, and we were still planning to go to Cho-Yu. And then when word came down that we were going to Manaslu, I remember Hoji and I got the map out, and I was looking at it, and I was like, oh my God, this is a giant avalanche slope. I don't see safe spots. Like, how are we going to camp? What are we going to do to limit our exposure? And I was definitely a little concerned, but I was also super excited. I'd never seen an 8,000 meter mountain. I wanted to go explore that whole type of adventure. So at this point, I left Dinafit. I was on my first Salomon trip, but I was actually on a Dinafit trip filming Betty Bohm, the president or CEO of Dinafit. I was there not as an athlete, but just as a filmer.
Okay.
They wanted to set a speed record on Cho-Yu, but we ended up going to try to set a speed record on Manaslu. And to me, that trip was a crazy learning experience because all of a sudden I was on a trip with people that weren't my typical partners, people that didn't understand my strengths or my weaknesses. And they had this crazy ego about it was man versus mountain, which is something I've never had. So it was an eye-opening experience.
The first few days there, you're touring around. The weather moves in for 10 days. When you finally do see Camp 2, you realize you're not going to camp there. You look at it and it's not safe. And just because an accident hasn't happened, it doesn't mean it won't happen. So you make a separate base camp. Are there people there that are making choices that you really don't feel comfortable with?
I mean, as in life and the mountains, I try not to judge others for their decisions, let them make their own calls. But yeah, when we went up to Camp 2, I was already apprehensive of trying to find safe spots. And all I was doing was looking around for some island of safety. And the main camp is just in the bottom of this massive 3,500, 4,000 foot avalanche path that just would rumble right by it. So I was definitely looking around and we found this little island of safety. It was awesome. It was this hump surrounded by a big moat over with just like 25-degree slopes above it, no big buildup, and it felt really good. But looking at the other camp, I mean, their numbers were such that there's no way they could use our little pedestal. I recognize that on those bigger mountains that there's an assumption of risk, that if you want to accomplish them, you're going to have to take greater risk. And I was skeptical, but there's nothing you can do. I do remember talking to Glenn Plake. They were up higher at Camp 3, and I remember seeing where his tent was, and I was like, "Whoa, wow. What do you think of that?" He's like, "Well, yeah, it's not great, but it's protected a bit by the serac, and, we're going to wear our beacons when we go to sleep." So he knew that they were exposed and that they were worried. But like I say, you kind of have to assume more risk to be successful up there.
And you wake up in Camp 2 to wind screaming and an avalanche had happened. And I would think it's just mass chaos. What happens when you wake up to a situation like that? I mean, what are your first moves?
We'll go back an hour. Is we'd actually planned on being on that slope that morning. We were like, okay, let's get up at 4. We'll get dressed. We'll go up to 7,000 meters again and get some skiing in and get acclimatized a bit more and then ski down. And then when we woke up at 4, it was minus 25 or 30 Celsius, freezing cold. And we were all like, hey, you guys want to go? No. And we all decided to stay in our tents. So we were lying there and, at 4:45 or whatever it was, the winds picked up and all of a sudden the tent was getting blasted. And I was like, what the hell? Like, is this just some wind gust? I was totally oblivious. And then one of my partners was like, no, it's an avalanche. And yeah, all of a sudden we recognized that there's this crazy event going on and it all thundered and the silence was there. All of a sudden we could hear voices, people shouting, anxiety, worries in their voice, but it was still dark. So we were looking out, we could see headlamps bobbing around, but we kind of didn't know exactly what had happened. So we got dressed and then we waited a little bit just to ensure that we weren't walking underneath another huge slab that was going to peel off or whatever.
Yep.
And because our camp was a little bit separate, we were the first people to tour onto the site. And we started finding tents and booties and different parts of camp. And then we stumbled upon our first group of French guys that were just sitting there shivering and gave them some water. And then they start pointing out different tents that are half buried and, all this crazy chaos around them. And yeah, it was a wild morning. 30 people were caught from the Camp 3 up where Glenn's camp had been, and 30 of them got caught and tumbled down 1,500 feet down the slope in their tents, in their sleeping bags, in an avalanche. It must have been the craziest experience. And then that avalanche, it just touched Camp 2 below us, but it didn't actually cause any damage down there, which was lucky.
Does something like that make you think more about the risk you're taking out there, or do you look at it as, yes, there's a ton of risk, but like Camp 2, if I were up there at Camp 3, I wouldn't put myself in the line of fire like that, so you wouldn't be in that situation?
You do think that, but our group was super fortunate. We were all really fit, and that Camp 3 was basically a marathon's distance of energy away from Camp 2 to the spot that I may have chosen to camp, which would have been another marathon. So it would have required like a double marathon worth of energy for people to get to. That's not a reality for the majority of people. So like I say, that risk has to be taken to be successful. It's just what you have to do in those mountains is that you can't go far. You just have to kind of accept it and make the best of your spot.
When you get home from that trip, because I think you turned around on that one and were like, fuck it, I'm done with this mountain. I had bad vibes as it was. You get home. What does the family have to say about that? Because yeah, I can see them being frustrated with you always being gone, but we haven't really talked about the risk that you're in. And is your wife just worried about you even more now when people are dying on these trips?
Yeah. I mean, forever I tried to instill for her not to worry, that I'm going to make the best decisions I can. And honestly, try to keep her a bit oblivious to it because I have partners whose wives worry the second they're not home and they have to constantly check in. And I think that's unhealthy. I think it's better to just hope and assume that your partner's making the best decisions. But, coming back from that one, obviously she was terribly concerned. She knew that it had been pretty close. Although our decisions had been good, we were still in a mountain that caught 30 people. And the veil of things are great, let me do my thing is definitely getting thinner and thinner at this point. My takeaways on that too. So forever, all the adventures I've had around here, I've had these great partners and we kind of developed this rapport with each other where they understood my strengths, but they also understood my weaknesses. And my one partner, Aaron Chance, this splitboarder guy in town, he was an awesome antidote to my weaknesses because he would always be questioning me to make sure that I had enough reasoning to ski the slopes. And he would ask me all the right questions and I'd have to give him all the right answers. Otherwise we wouldn't ski things. And the partnerships were key for both of us to be successful. And we were incredibly successful and we backed off lots of things. But all of a sudden that trip in Manaslu, I was with people that didn't know. I didn't know their risk tolerances. I was talking about beacons and probes and shovels and everything. And when we're at that Camp 2, I look around and I was the only guy with a shovel. So I was with a group of people that had these risk tolerances that were far above and beyond mine. And it really made me reflect on how important partnerships are.
You and your partners are the guys that have been taking all the classes. When you're going on a trip like that, it's almost like you're the guide in that situation because the other people don't have the education. And in 2014, I think that's the year you become a certified guide. And while I don't want to dive too far into it, I do have a couple questions. I guess the first would be, what's the most harrowing experience you've ever had with a client?
With a client, I keep the degree of safety as big as I can with clients because I know that they are hiring me to make the right decisions. And I'm a risk taker on my own. I love pushing the limits, finding that line. But with clients, I've definitely always kept it really tight and controlled because as their skills develop, we do bigger lines and stuff. But I mean, with clients, I've never had a client buried or anything. Once we had a small avalanche come down between the group, and that's the closest I ever came. But the degree of guilt that I felt of having made that decision when I should have skied that slope, climbed that slope earlier in the morning, instead we'd gone somewhere else and we were an hour and a half later. The guilt made me really analyze it, and I'm definitely super conservative with my clients.
Okay. And was the big push by all the ski manufacturers getting people into the side country and backcountry, does that have a huge impact on your world? Do you see a lot more people out there now?
Oh, yeah. I mean, Rogers Pass has changed a ton. We used to be the only people here in the early 2000s, and now it's jam-packed full of people. But I think at least in North America, there's definitely a high degree of people willing to learn and take courses and approach it the right way. But there's no doubt that the stuff I've seen lately is kind of scary. I mean, people are doing things the wrong way and not getting caught, and that's reinforcing them to keep doing it the wrong way, which is scary. I try to lead by example and not follow a skin track that I wouldn't put in there and kind of educate that way and just try to help it out. But yeah, it's rampant out there. People are loving the backcountry, and I see why, obviously, because I love it too. And I'm all for more people. I just want to make sure they learn to do it the right way.
And when you see people doing what they shouldn't be doing, do you step in and let them know that they are at risk?
Try to. It's a challenging one. Like I say, you don't want to judge others for what they're doing, but because of my degree of experience and, I've come close a lot, I've made tons of mistakes. So I try to share it in an open discussion so that they kind of can see, but it's hard for sure. It's a challenging one because you don't want to be a jerk and be like, hey, you're doing this wrong, but you also want to help them do it right.
Yeah. I mean, you want people to live. That's, I think, the ultimate goal. My final question about being a guide, you being not just a guide, but a pro skier guide with a name that people know, can you charge more because of your accomplishments?
Probably if I was good at business and I was greedy. I mean, I'm sure I could. I'm starting to charge a little bit more each year. I'm like, okay, Greg, come on, you are worth more. You can charge a little bit more. And I'm getting better at it, but I've always liked to be humble and assume that we're all awesome humans and that each person's as valuable as the next. But I'm starting to try to charge a little bit more. I know that I can definitely give a great experience. I mean, my knowledge of terrain and as busy as Rogers Pass is, it's very rare for me to take clients and not give them untracked, pristine slopes. So I'm recognizing that I do have knowledge that's valuable and I should charge a bit more for it.
Yeah, it makes sense. The next breaking story.
Unintended.
Yeah, unintended breaking story is you head to Pakistan. What's this whole project about?
Yeah, so Peter Sprucenix had skied there a couple of years before, and he was making a movie, and he was all excited to go, and he invited me on this trip. And I was like, well, of course. Why wouldn't I go to Pakistan? I've never been. It's remote, new culture. I'm super excited about it. So I joined their trip to Pakistan, but I call this my false confidence trip because I just passed my full ski guide exam, like you said. So I was certified that I knew my shit. I just done 100 vertical kilometers or 330,000 feet in the month of March that year. I was like super fit, super knowledgeable, and I was a mountain man, I was certified. So I was going in with a little bit too much confidence. And also because of my guiding exam and everything, I hadn't done a lot of adrenaline filled adventures. So I kind of had a bit of that need for speed or that desire to push it a bit. So there's a lot of things that kind of lined up to make it a bit of a disastrous trip.
You end up getting caught in a big slide. You snap your leg. You have a camera rolling on you at the end a little bit, and I would expect some kind of emotion to come out of a near-death experience like that, but it seemed like nothing. You're chill, calm, cool, collected, kind of analyzing what happened. You can tell you're in a little bit of pain, but it's like nothing happened there. That's a weird aftermath to that experience, in my opinion. I mean, looking back on it now, is it weird to you?
Part of being successful in the mountains is being able to separate your emotions from what's actually happening. I don't know if it makes us the best partners in life for women, but I do. I think to be successful, to be able to go down wild slopes, climb wild mountains, you have to be able to separate those emotions and just deal with concrete facts and what's happening. I think that's what kind of comes out in that video. It's like, yeah, I just skied that slope. I got tumbled down 1,500 feet through an avalanche, got my leg broken, my shoulder smashed, my head, all sorts of things. I was fine. I was okay-ish. I know lots of people make fun of me, but I was absolutely calm at that time. And you might as well take some time to think and record your thoughts at that time. During the rescue, it was a 24-hour rescue. We slept at a snow cave. I was the guy that was teaching them what to do to provide traction onto my leg to separate the bones. And I was like the calmest, the best victim you could possibly have. There was no emotion involved whatsoever. Right up to the point where they're loading me in the helicopter and one of my porters was about to run into the blades with the skis on his back. And I was on point. There was nothing getting in the way of good decision making at that point. But the second I got into the helicopter, the door closed, the helicopter took off, and I knew that I'd survived. I cried for about a half an hour. I mean, all the walls came down, everything came down, and I just cried because I was like, oh my God, I survived. During the rescue, during all that, there was no place for that. There was no place for that weakness because it was survive or not. And by allowing any of that weakness in, possibly I wouldn't have survived the night. The emotional distance was needed to get me out of that situation.
So you end up taking a heli and then a plane and you get home and you get healthy. And then I think the next big move for you, it's really a challenge. In 2017, electric vehicles are out there and you and Chris Rubens are going to trade a big truck for a little plug-in car and you're going to try to climb and ski all the volcanoes. And do you look at your carbon footprint over the past 15 years and wanted to test what was out there technology-wise? What was going on in your head when you guys did that?
That was a long time coming. In 2012, I spent a month biking to my adventures, to my mountains. I tested it then. I was like, okay, let's see if I can have a carbon neutral month of adventure. And I biked to 12 different summits or 11 different summits out of Revelstoke. And it was this incredible month, but it was hard. You had to bike 20 miles to go climb 7,000 feet to bike 20 miles back or whatever. The days weren't easy. What was funny is that my partners were typically driving by in a vehicle with a spare seat and meeting me at the trailhead. And I was looking at it, I was like, oh God, this is great. Like, who's going to do this? Nobody's going to do this. If I can't even get my partners to join me and they're really fit, like, how is this going to catch on? And I realized that it was totally pointless because it was just too hard. And so through the years, I was realizing that for things to change, for people to change, it has to be easy. It has to be possible for the average person. And the electric cars all of a sudden were coming on. I was like, oh, wow. At that point, I had an F-350 that when I turned it on in the winter, it would cough out a huge plume of black smoke. I had a snowmobile that when I started it would also spew out black smoke.
Why do you have a snowmobile? You tour everywhere.
Well, if you want to go deeper for more adventures, you got to get up those logging roads. Logging roads are flat. They're really flat. But yeah, so I've been using those two vehicles. I've been heli guiding 4 weeks of the year. I was traveling to Norway to ski, back for a few days, back to France. I was jet setting pro lifestyle. And yeah, it was really grating on me because I knew that not only was I doing it, but I was inspiring others to live that same way. So it wasn't just my impact, it was the impacts of everyone else that I was pushing and inspiring. So I was like, okay, well, what can we do? And I was invited on that Salomon free ski trip to Greenland. I ended up not going, which I've always been bummed about, but it was called Guilt Trip. And Rubens came back from that and, they discovered that the glaciers are melting quicker than they thought and we're all part of the problem. And it was called Guilt Trip, but nobody on that trip had changed their lives at all.
Right.
So I kind of started putting the pressure on Chris and it kind of exasperated what I'd been on. And it was like, okay, well, maybe there are ways. And I saw the electric cars. And then about 2016, there was some Teslas out there. And then there was some Nissan Leafs that went a short range. The only way people thought about electric cars was, oh, they're a vehicle to commute. And I was like, well, maybe not. Then the Chevrolet Bolt came out, which was kind of the first poor man's Tesla. I was like, oh, look at that. Maybe that's possible. And it's an affordable vehicle for an average person, and maybe it can work. So I ordered one in December 2016. I was like, oh, I'm so psyched, assuming I'd get it January 1st, 2017. So I sold my truck, gave away my snowmobile, stopped heli guiding, and then I didn't even get the car till July of 2017. That winter wasn't great. I was still driving around, but then April, May was coming. I was like, okay, I got to do something. And I found out that I could rent a Nissan Leaf out of Vancouver. And I was like, okay, this is it. Let's explore this. And Chris joined me for the first electric adventure trip down the coast, climbing volcanoes. And it was this hilarious trip with two buddies, driving less than 100 miles between charges and just trying to see if there really was a potential to electric vehicles.
And does the switch flip right there for you when you get back from that trip and you're like, holy shit, I can do this. The technology is only going to get better and I'm going to be that lightning rod for change. Is that when it happens, like a real hard stop?
Pretty hard stop. That was May. Awesome. We did 6 volcanoes. It was super exciting. Went down to California. We came back and then I was still waiting for my car. I still did a couple of adventures with vehicles. wicked alpine climbing, cool days, but it was great at me. Then I got my car July 17th and truly started the electric adventures. I started climbing some summits, and right off the bat, I was psyched. It was happening, but I wasn't completely committed because when a friend invited me to go do Niflheim to Thor Traverse, which is this alpine traverse 5 summit thing I've been wanting to do forever, I was like, sure. And jumped in the gas car and drove in whatever it was, 50 kilometers to that objective. And while I was in the car, I was getting bounced along and I was thinking, I've got to commit to this. Like, it's all or none. I can't just be like, oh yeah, I'll do some electric adventures and then I'll jump in this car because this would make sense. I've got to fully commit. So after that, it was full commitment to any adventure that I was in control of that, were my own stories. I was like, I'm in. It's all electric adventures from then on.
So you've got that going. At this point, you start lobbying the U.S. POW group to expand Protect Our Winters to Canada. They didn't really have the manpower, so you take it under your wing to make this happen. We've established that business is not your forte, so being a desk jockey is not for you. You end up bringing in people to help you with Protect Our Winters in Canada, but I believe you were the inspiration for getting that into Canada.
I was definitely pushing for it. I applied for the nonprofit stuff. I got some lawyers to work on stuff. I was trying to figure out how to create the board. It wasn't in my field house at all. I was like, oh my God, I have no idea how to do this. And I waffled on it for a bit. I did as much as I could, but I was like, this is going nowhere. And Dave Erb out of Ontario was kind of independently starting, but had heard about me, and I was able to pass off the stuff I'd paid for, the stuff I'd gotten done. And then he has been incredible. He just took the flag and he's been running with it, which is so awesome.
You handed off to Dave. You are still involved in Protect Our Winters, but for you, it's not like you can fly places and do things. So how do you have an impact with Protect Our Winters based on you not being able to travel too far?
So let's be clear here. I do the best I can, and I have flown for some things. It's a total irony. Chris and I had a movie called The Curve of Time that Jordan Manley made, and it's about accessing your choices and trying to figure out what you can do. And there we were. We flew to Toronto, drove to Montreal and back, and then had to show this movie about trying to fly less, but flying to it. And you buy your offsets, you do what you can, but at some point you have to weigh off the potential of, okay, am I going to influence enough people with this trip to offset the cost of my one flight? And yeah, we're all hypocrites, and it's always just trying to find the best impact you can have.
Well, it's such a radical shift for you to make in your life. Choosing not to fly in most cases, that means you're not going to be able to see your sponsors when they have events. You're not going to be at the different things they need you at. And sponsors, do they have anything to say about your newfound lifestyle?
Initially, there was a lot of skepticism around it. They're like, really? How are you going to do this? And as an athlete, our goal is storytelling. Can we create stories that, one, are relevant to our time and interesting? And to me, emotionally, I was all invested in this, but obviously I love my profession. So I was like, oh, how can I make this work? And there's definitely some worries. And they all accept my choices, but there's also times when I have to fly. I mean, working prototyping gear for Salomon, I have to go to France to work on it because that's the way it's going to work. And, the first year I was well into my electric adventures, and they're like, can you come? And I was like, I'd prefer not to. And I was like, well, do you want your job? And I went, well, yes. Okay. So I was coming. There is that catch no matter what. So it's balancing it and doing the best I can. And forever, Arc'teryx didn't want to invite me to their academy in Chamonix because they knew what my footprint and everything. And this summer, I finally acquiesced. I was like, okay, I'll go. What I did is I bought the carbon offsets for my flight. I tried to do the best I could when I was there, but I maximized that trip as best as possible. I did the academy. I worked with Salomon. I did some stuff with Gore-Tex. I did some stuff with Sunta. So I took the trip, did it, but just tried to make it as best as possible. But then when I come back, my own stories, everything I can do is all electric. I try to be as sustainable as possible, but it's a constant challenge.
How about your friends? Do they look at what you're doing as career suicide when you make that choice?
Yeah. Initially, it probably seemed like career suicide to a lot, but the impacts my voice has gained from this and the relevance to our time is so important that it's working out really well.
I mean, do you look at it as in the late 90s, skiers were used to help build the heli ski business in Canada? It exploded, and it was kind of on the backs of pro skiers because they used them as influencers to get people to go heli skiing. And is that what you're doing now for the electric world?
How do you mean? So am I...
Do you look at your role as you being the first dude to actually live this lifestyle in this world? Is it something that you think is going to catch on where you being a known entity and other people seeing you do it are going to realize that it's attainable and you hope to see a shift based on what you're doing?
I mean, I absolutely see a shift. I see a shift in the people I'm talking to. The amount of people that I've converted to getting electric cars it's growing daily. And it's the type of thing where you convert one, they convert two. It just grows that way. And it's really fun being the explorer. I've explored first ascents, I've explored traverses and what have you, human potential, but I'm exploring this new way of adventuring and it's definitely catching on. I mean, I just did a talk in Vancouver the other night and I talked to a couple of people after, and they were people that I talked to a year or so before, and now they have an electric car, and now they're trying it out. You know, it's really fun.
Cool. Well, you have had some amazing accomplishments over your career, some unbelievable stuff that's hard to comprehend, and now I'm going to shit on them a little bit.
Awesome.
Before there was Electric Greg, your life could be looked at as pretty selfish. You were traveling the world, you're focused on your goals for your happiness and your satisfaction at the expense of other people who want your time. Do you ever have those conversations with your wife or your kids or feel like you're missing out on a lot of things that they're doing?
I just did a trip now. I was gone for 10 days and I missed this whole event where my son got accused of writing these racist things on the bus and he was totally torn and ended up having a shitty day and a shitty night. And I do wish I'd been here for it. One of the prices of success is you're probably not going to be at home as much as you want to at that time. I do think my 20s and 30s, I think for anybody, the 20s and 30s is a time to define yourself, to become who you are. And I think that selfishness is needed because that's what you sit back on for years and are content with your life if you've kind of given her for those years. I feel like the 40s, maybe it's just the kids and everything, but it becomes a bit less selfish and a bit more about them and about your legacy. When I'm home, I'm the dad that cooks. I'm the dad that drives kids everywhere. I'm as engaged as possible. That's the balance I do, is that when I'm home, I'm the man. I'm here, but I'm going to be gone. You know, I think I'm gone 60 days a year.
That's manageable nowadays.
It's manageable, you know, and it's hard, but it's also, my kids understand that it's like, it's who I am and it's what I need to do. And I'm sure at some point they'll understand it more, but my son definitely wished I was here last week.
Yeah, no, I can see that. And then when you become Electric Greg, that's another huge thing that can be looked at as selfish too, because when you make that decision, your whole family has to adapt because this is who you decided to be. And while that's a good thing, they have to adapt their lifestyle to fit around yours a little bit. And is there a conversation about that too? Like, hey, I get it. You're so passionate and a believer and we are too. But the way that you take things and the way that you do it is going to be different than we do it.
Exactly. I try to be inclusive with them and make it part of their life. And hopefully they understand that I'm doing it for the kids, you know, for them. But I balance it out. You know, if there is a time when we can drive to the Vancouver, which takes longer, the electric car, we do it. But occasionally there's been trips like my daughter's trampoline where it's this crazy 12-hour drive to get there. And I'm not going to be perfect. I'll jump in the gas car and it's not as fun or as good, but I'll go that way. Or, you know, last March, my dad had a sailboat in Mexico and it was like, we were invited down there and I couldn't say no for the family. You know, I had to accept that, one, I'm not perfect and that they should see the world. And I did. I went with them and it was an incredible trip for them. It showed them Mexico, a bunch of sailing, some really cool life moments for them. And I shared it with them, but it's selfish, but the actions I'm doing are to be non-selfish.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, they get it. My kids love the electric car. The weekday vegetarianism, they like, but I know that when I'm not here, my wife definitely cooks more meat than when I'm here, but that's fine. I mean, it's all these habits that are tough to break, and I get that.
You should get a Traeger grill because that'll increase your meat intake 100-fold. They're so good, but I know that's not your goal. I just wanted to plug them because I fucking love their grill. It's so amazing. But at this point in the show, I have something that I call inappropriate questions. And what I do is I get someone that you know to come up with 3 inappropriate questions and put you on the spot. For you, I actually have 2 sets of inappropriate questions because I have another podcaster, a guy I think you know by the name of Jonathan Ellsworth. He's from the blisterreview.com.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's got the Blister podcast, and I wanted to give him an opportunity to ask you 3 inappropriate questions before we get into the main course. So we're going to go with Jonathan's.
So wait, am I going to get 6 inappropriate questions?
You are. You're the first one ever, Greg. Sorry, I wanted to plug someone else's podcast too. And that came at the expense of 3 inappropriate questions for you. Given he sent me 6, I cut the ones that really didn't need to be in the show. But I will go with his first inappropriate question right here.
Which group is the most insufferable? People who don't eat meat, people who drive electric cars, people who only ski the backcountry, or mountain guides?
Which group is the most insufferable?
Yep.
I wish you'd said vegans, because I probably would have gone with vegans and not just people who don't eat meat.
Dude, they are so amazing whenever they post on something on like a Protect Our Winters post on Instagram. The vegans are like the most aggressive people that I've ever seen on the internet.
It's wild. I agree with what they're doing. I think it's a great statement. I don't think it's perfect for everyone. But yeah, I mean, I would probably go with people that don't eat meat are the most insufferable. I mean, guides can be quite terrible and love to tell you the way to live and do things, but I'm going to go with that.
All right, we will jump into question number 2.
How angry does it make you that Cody Townsend discovered the backcountry 3 years ago and now acts like he owns the place? Does that make you really angry or like Incredible Hulk level angry?
I don't get angry, thankfully. I think Cody's challenge is incredible. I think what he's doing is going to make him grow some balls and become a mountain man, because he's definitely not. I do look forward to when he's breaking trail and not all the other amazing characters that he's brought onto his movies.
Okay, we will go with question number 3.
What's the worst product you've ever used that was made by one of your sponsors?
To me, for my specific backcountry uses, the Guardian was a very challenging binding for me.
It was just too light?
Yeah, the pivot was too good. Yeah, that can be an inflammatory question.
Do you want me to leave that out?
No, I think it's fine.
Yeah, I think it's fine too. Now we will go to another set of inappropriate questions. This set of inappropriate questions is one of the first I've gotten from someone 50 and older. This guy is a good friend of yours, I believe. He is known as the grandfather. He was known as the godfather, but he became the grandfather. Mike Douglas, the inventor of the modern twin tip, just an all-around badass, switchback entertainment. He's done so much. And let's go to Mike Douglas's first inappropriate question.
Well, the first thing I want to know is, Greg, your best friend in Revelstoke, Chris Rubens, who you guys have been doing a lot of stuff together over the last bunch of years. He is now dating your sister and living at your mom's house. What's going on there, buddy?
So that sounds like incest, but not really incest. What's going on here?
I think what happened then is we spent so many times in the tent together that he developed this kind of boyish love for me. And then when he realized that he could act on it and that my sister is super awesome, that he just kind of went for the second best option, I think. And I think it's working out for him. But the living in my mom's basement, that thing I hope he grows out of soon enough.
Yeah, you don't even live there.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, that's my backup plan when my wife kicks me out. So he better move out of there at some point.
Well, you still have time, it seems like. We'll go with question number 2.
The next thing I want to know, Greg, is now that you're electric Greg and you're all eco-friendly and stuff, what's the one sort of environmentally unfriendly thing that you miss the most from your previous life?
I did a lot of work in the forestry. I definitely got quite addicted to the rumble of a diesel engine and that smell. There's nothing quite like just letting your diesel idle and just spew out that beautiful smell of diesel.
The last words we thought we'd hear from your mouth.
I don't believe in that anymore, but I mean, it triggers some sort of manly vibe in me driving a big rumbling truck.
Compared to a little clown car?
Compared to my little clown car, definitely. I love the zippiness, but it doesn't have that like I am man feel to it yet.
No throat to it whatsoever?
Yeah.
All right, let's go with our final inappropriate question.
As the father of a teenage daughter, Greg, flash forward a few years here, you're at a house party full of free skiers. Name one professional free skier that you really hope your daughter is not talking to at the party.
Oh my God. The list is so big. I don't know. I mean, right off the bat, it's Alexei Godbout for sure. And I'm sure Mike knew that too.
Well, that's going to do it for the podcast. Your career has been one in suffering. I mean, while you enjoy it, the amount that you have gone uphill is just unbelievable to me. And your fitness and your lungs, I mean, it has to put you on another plane of super athlete. And when they measure VO2 max and find that some athletes have more than others, I'm sure you're one of those dudes that fits in that category. And while I can't say it's been fun to watch because it's been painful to watch because you're going up so much, It has been really mind-blowing, the accomplishments you've achieved in your career, and I thank you for your time.
I just have to say that when I look at myself, I honestly just consider myself a normal individual with a bit of drive, not exceptional in any real way, except that I dream up some great fantasies and try to accomplish them.
You have accomplished them. They're fantasies that most people couldn't, even if they really wanted to, and that's it, man. So that was time with Greg Hill, the human electric lung. And what a cool guy with some crazy experiences in the mountains. I mean, he wasn't even really supposed to be a skier. He was a badass climber who got hurt, and he figured he needed to focus on something else because he wasn't strong enough to be a badass climber anymore. And what does he decide to do? He takes a path that most other skiers don't take, the uphill path, and he sets and breaks every record that has ever been recorded there. I'm making that up. I'm not looking at any record book. But I don't think there are many people capable of doing anything close to what Greg Hill has done in his career. And now Greg's career is changing. He has gone from diesel-powered Greg to electric Greg. His carbon footprint has been reduced, and he is doing something differently than anybody else has ever done it before. He is becoming a lightning rod for change. Everyone can watch Greg's adventures on the internet and see how his life has completely changed, but it is still just as fulfilling, if not more fulfilling than it ever was before. That's the podcast for this week. I want to thank you for listening, ask you to review me on whatever platform you listen to me on. Email me. My email is mike@thepowellmovement.com, and I will get back to you. Finally, I want to thank my sponsors who make this show happen. They are Evo, Stanley, Spy Optic, the 10 Barrel Brewery, and the Summit at Snoqualmie. Have a great week, everyone.